Loneliness impacts small and medium-sized businesses in quite profound ways. Loneliness can not only impact the owner of the business, but it can impact the leaders of the business, the people who do the regular day-to-day work for the business, and it can even impact the business's customers. Loneliness is this gap between that connection that you have with other people that is meaningful and the absence of that gap. It doesn't seem like that's a big deal unless you start to look at the impact of loneliness on people who are affected by it. Loneliness can be categorized by 3 levels. The basic level is where we are all experiencing some degree of loneliness at appropriate times during our lives. And those are momentary changes in our stages in life. And that can be from the loss of a loved one. It could be from a temporary illness. It could be because we are exposed to a group that's different from us, or because the pace of society is moving so fast and we're just not keeping up. Now, when we get to the point where we're experiencing more loneliness than that, it becomes a little bit more chronic. And when we're in this second stage of loneliness, we tend to start withdrawing from other people. Not only physically withdrawing from other people, but emotionally withdrawing from other people. That's when we should be worried. Because if we don't pay attention to that, we get to the point where it's critical loneliness, where we're completely withdrawn from other people altogether, and then we see symptoms that negatively appear in our behavior, in our self-care, in our physical health, in our mental health, and in our emotional health. So loneliness can actually be a good thing because it can give us some indication that we need to do something. It's almost like having a cold or having some negative thing happen to you, like getting burnt. It tells you to pull away from the fire. Or if you get a cold, it tells you that maybe you need to take some rest. Or if you are falling asleep in the middle of the day, maybe you need to sleep longer and get better sleep. Loneliness is similar in that if you get the sense that you're feeling lonely and it's getting a little more prolonged, you need to pay attention to it because there may be something going on with you that will impact not only you, but your business. Now, there are several types of loneliness. At the core level is this psychological loneliness. And then there's relationship or relational loneliness, and then existential loneliness. In fact, some people, when they're describing loneliness as it relates to business, thinks about loneliness in other categories, such as intimate loneliness. And that is that loneliness that they feel when they don't have someone personal to connect to, like a spouse or a boyfriend or girlfriend, or a very close friend, someone that they can confide in and be vulnerable with and feel that level of trust. That's not only implicit, but explicit as well. At the next stage would be relational loneliness, which would be the loneliness that you have from not being consistently involved with a group of people towards working towards a common task or towards a common goal. You usually find that people who work at home suffer from this relational loneliness. And people at work who are coming physically to the office don't necessarily experience that as much. And then there's the collective loneliness or the existential loneliness, being connected to something bigger than yourself or greater than yourself. Now, people don't realize that when you look at the research on loneliness and the impact that it has on your physical body, your mental health, and your emotional health, there's some direct correlations to that. When we experience loneliness, we tend to do so as a result of something, pillars, if you will. And the 5 pillars of loneliness usually are sickness, aging, distance, differentiation, and modernity, not being able to keep pace with the modern society. Of course, you can experience loneliness from trauma as well. Let's take trauma as an example. If we experience trauma, whether it's physical trauma or being around a very traumatic event, that impacts us, that may cause us to have some degree of uncertainty. That may cause us to have some degree of anxiety. When we are in a state of anxiety, our body tends to produce and deploy more cortisol. That cortisol triggers the fight or flight syndrome, causes us to withdraw. And usually we're withdrawing for self-preservation reasons. We believe that someone is going to harm us, or we want to avoid the conflict altogether because that will cause some kind of harm to us that we perceive, whether that harm is physical harm or emotional harm. Now, as we pull back for self-preservation, then what we usually experience is some level of depression because we're not connecting to other people. And we don't have that relationship to rely upon. That depression usually leads to a lack of self-care. And that usually shows up in weight gain, lack of sleep, lack of proper diet, which eventually shows up in the form of cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease, cancer, and other physical descriptions of what that can be, or physical manifestations, if you will. Well, the more that happens, the more uncomfortable you are being around other people. And so that actually perpetuates more loneliness. So how does this impact a business? If an entrepreneur, owner of a business, experiences a trauma and pulls back and withdraws, then he or she is not dedicating the time necessary to operate the business. His or her focus will be shifted from the business to self-preservation. All of the physical, emotional, and mental resources will be shifted away from making sure that the business is productive, operational, and making progress towards the self-preservation of the entrepreneur. Obviously, that will have a negative impact on the business. But what if someone who is in your leadership team has experienced some trauma? Will that also cause them to withdraw? Will that also cause them some sort of loneliness? Of course it can. And this is the same phenomenon that can happen to any of the employees for a small and medium-sized business. And it can also happen to your customers. So now that you know that loneliness can occur in a business, from the ownership level all the way down to the worker level and even at the customer level, and you know that it can have a negative impact dramatically, not only the people experiencing the negative emotions and effect of loneliness, but it can also spread to other members of the team and eventually impact the business in a negative way. But what can you do about it? Well, there's several steps that you can take. The first is you've got to raise your awareness about this loneliness issue. And you cannot push it under the rug. You've got to recognize when you're experiencing loneliness, whether it's because of a trauma that you experienced, because you are in that stage in your life cycle where you're aging out, or you are ill, either temporarily or you have news of a permanent illness that you have to deal with, or that you are somehow feeling very different from the competition or the people within the industry, or even from the people within your organization. That differentiation can cause you to pull back and not engage with those people. And this happens quite often. This happens quite often when people in an organization are different in terms of ethnicity, race, sex, sexual orientation, religion, nationality, and any of these other criteria or protective classes. And it's easy for them to feel lonely because they don't have a way to connect with the other people. But it's also very difficult for other people to understand why they're feeling lonely because of fundamental attribution error. People are really just not looking at them the same way as they would look at themselves. And when they look at these people and they see that these people are withdrawing, they're usually attributing that withdrawal to something negative associated with that person, as opposed to understanding how the environment actually impacts them and may have triggered that or maybe a contributing factor to that loneliness. Of course, when you as an entrepreneur are lonely, when your leadership teams or members of your leadership teams are lonely, when your workers are lonely, their focus is not on the business. And when the focus is not on the business, then the tasks that are required to be completed on a daily basis don't get done. And if they do get done, they don't get done as efficiently as they would have been done otherwise. So this first part of the solution of raising your self-awareness is pretty important. And of course, one way you can do that is to have open discussions about loneliness. Maybe make it part of your weekly meeting. Is there anything going on with anyone that we need to know about? Has anyone experienced any trauma? Is anyone experiencing any issues relative to their personal stages of their life cycle? Are they experiencing any illness themselves or in their family? Are we doing enough as a business to make sure that people are included and don't feel different because they may be of a different sex or sexual orientation or religious belief or from a different nation altogether as we work together? Are we making sure that people are educated about the changes in the environment and the technology and so forth so that they are able to keep up in a responsible way? There's also an awareness that needs to be made about people in roles of responsibility. For example, if someone is caring for an elderly parent or a sick child or a sick spouse or even a sick sibling or friend, that person is going to experience a degree of loneliness as well, because not only are they're providing for the care of that person, but they're usually the transportation for that person. They're usually the logistical person for that person they're caring for. And they're usually caring for the medical aspects and the emotional aspects related to their loved one. When your time is engulfed taking care of someone with their transportation, their logistics, their medical care, their emotional care, then you really have little time for yourself. And if you're balancing time between them and your job or your business, eventually the business may lose out because people will feel that they have a stronger obligation and their priority lies with their loved ones. That can create a degree of loneliness because they will pull back from the business and they will be self-alienating to some extent. The resulting symptoms can be the same. So now that we've raised our self-awareness about this issue of loneliness, and we know that it's a real issue for businesses from the entrepreneurial level to the leadership level to the worker level and even at the customer level, what can we do about that? Well, what we can do about it is create opportunities for people to be creative. Creativity has been shown to help people express who they are and connect themselves with their true self. What does that mean? What that means, quite frankly, is that people feel more engaged, and the more engaged they are physically and mentally and emotionally with anything that they're doing, especially when they're creating something new, it invigorates them to the point of shifting their focus from all of the negative things in their lives to something that's positive. And it gives them an opportunity to express themselves in the thing that they're creating. Whether that creation is art, visual art, whether it's performing arts, or just cooking, or exercise, or just doing anything at all that doesn't involve work, or caring for someone else, or dealing with your sickness, or reliving or re-experiencing the trauma, or focusing on the differences between themselves and other people, or the changes in society. That act of focusing on that one particular thing and getting creative with it helps us really connect with our inner selves. And once you've engaged in that creative process and you've created something, then share it. Because by sharing that thing that you create, you get the opportunity to communicate with other people and engage with other people and share a part of you that you may not have been able to communicate with about without that thing. For example, when you create a piece of artwork, you put a piece of yourself in the artwork, and you express yourself in a way that when someone else sees it, they can actually see that expression. They can see that part of you, and it can open up a conversation during that communication where you can start actively discussing that subject. By discussing that subject, you're in a position now where you are actually chipping away at the loneliness. You're building a stronger connection between you and your true self, and you're sharing that with someone else, being vulnerable with them, encouraging them to be vulnerable with you, thereby chipping away at this relational loneliness, and building more intimacy with that person. That is very helpful, because then once that loneliness subsides, you're able to focus on your business. You're able to focus on leading your team. You're able to focus on getting the tasks that you want completed. If you recognize a degree of loneliness with your customers, then you can have a conversation with them about that as well, and help them to raise their awareness, help them to spark some creativity, and to communicate with them about that thing which they create, and help alleviate that loneliness. By paying attention to this subject that's never discussed when we're talking about businesses, and understanding the impact of loneliness on you, on your leadership team, on your workers, and even on your customers, and then having a strategy to actively deal with that loneliness, a tool, if you will, and practicing that strategy, utilizing that tool on a daily basis, you can actively fight this loneliness phenomenon. You can actively help people shift from self-preservation to collaboration, cooperation, and working actively to create something that will impact the world in a positive way. Your business, your products, your services. To learn more about loneliness, I recommend that you read the book, Project Unlonely. This is written by a professor at Harvard Medical School, who is also a practicing physician, who noticed this problem with loneliness in his practice as he dealt with patients over the years. Conducted quite a bit of research and developed the technique that we talked about here, which has helped to relieve loneliness in the patients that he's worked with. Having worked with businesses now for almost 30 years, I have recognized the same pattern of loneliness with entrepreneurs, with their leadership team, with their workers, and even their customers. And using his model, I've been able to talk to these entrepreneurs and educate them about this topic, and to teach them the strategy, and to help them deploy that strategy for themselves and for their businesses and for their customers, which have made a tremendous difference for them and their business. To learn more about how we can help you as an entrepreneur and your business, call us at 407-647-7887 or visit us on the web at www.privatecorporatecounsel.com.
Please continue to listen to our podcast to learn more. Contact us at 877-647-7887 or email us at info@pcc.law to learn more about the Private Corporate Counsel program and how we can help you and your business on your journey to success.